Great. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this little info session all about History Day. I am Emily Volkman, and this is Kristen Newby. So I'm with Capitol Square Review and Advisory Board at the State House. We run the Region 6 contest, which we'll talk about in just a minute. And Kristen works at the Columbus Metropolitan Library. So we're excited to share a few things about history, a few things about local resources with you in this little info session. So I'm going to share my screen. We'll get started here, see what happens. I'm bad at Zoom, so, fair warning. And it's begun. Okay, so we are going to enter full screen mode. So welcome once again. Again, my name is Emily. I work at the Ohio State House. I actually work for Capitol Square Review and Advisory Board, which is the nonpartisan, apolitical agency that takes care of this historic Civil War era building. It's on the National Register of Historic Places, and we have a small museum education center. So we have a museum within the building with some fun things to learn about, all about Ohio's government and history. We also have public programs and tours. So if you or someone you know is interested in taking a State House tour, we would be more than happy to get you set up with that. But again, we also do public programs. So throughout the year, we have different programs going on. And today we are going to be talking about History Day. So welcome to History Day. History Day is a national program. So it began in Cleveland, Ohio in 1974. It's a program that that encourages student-driven research. So it focuses on students identifying primary and secondary sources, requires students to create their findings, present their findings in a creative manner. So students basically act like historians. They find topics that interest them, spend a while looking at different sources that we'll talk about a little bit later, and then come to their own conclusions with what they've found. So the cool thing about History Day is that it aligns with a bunch of different standards that as educators, you're all much more familiar with than I am. But really quickly, it aligns with the College, Career, and Civil Life C3 framework, the Partnership for 21st Century Skills, and Ohio's new learning standards alignment. So if you would like to see specific examples and ways that History Day integrates into that curriculum that already exists, feel free to reach out to me. I have many PDFs that go over that in pretty extensive detail. So as far as the History Day program structure works, some schools begin with a contest for themselves. Now, there are several different ways to integrate History Day. We'll talk about that a little bit later too. If not that many people want to participate or are participating, or you don't have a way to fit that into your curriculum this year, that's totally fine. Some schools do have school-wide contests, so I thought I'd put it in here. Students who do well there will move on to the regional contest. Now, if you look at the little map of Ohio here, this shows the different regions in the Ohio History Day contest. So we are Region 6, that's Central Ohio region. There are 10 total, so you can feel free to explore who's in which region, take a closer look at that map. But again, we're that Central Ohio region. And our contest is held here at the Ohio State House. So it's a really cool opportunity for students to present this project that they've been working on for months in a really interesting historic building. The students who do, the best, who move on to the state contest, that is run by the Ohio History Connection. So they are in charge of all of the planning for that. Usually it's held at Ohio Wesleyan University. It's, a college campus. There's a lot of students who participate. On the regional level, we get around 200 to 300 students. They get significantly more at the state contest because they're pulling from all over the place. And then the students who score the best there will then move on to the national contest. And the national contest takes place in College Park, Maryland. So it's in June. So after most schools have released for the year, it's a few days that happen. But it's a fun opportunity for students who really excel in these projects to go present their research on the national stage with students competing from all over the country. Now, History Day is split up into a few different divisions. So the junior division, you'll see is grades 6 through 8, so our middle schoolers. And then senior is grades 9 through 12 with our high schoolers. So, you don't have a 6th grader competing against an 11th grader. That would be madness. So we try to keep it a little more fair that way. At the state level, so these are the divisions we have here at the regional level. At the state level, they also have a youth contest. So there's grades 4 and 5 have the opportunity to participate in this program. So that's if you have younger students who are interested, that's an option for them too. Something I don't have written down on this slide is that students are also able to present their work individually or work in groups. So depending on the student or whatever works best for your classroom, there are a couple different methods for students to participate. So plenty of students work in groups, plenty work individually. They also compete group versus group, like, if a student's in a group, they compete against other groups, individuals compete against other individuals. So again, it's broken down that way as well. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but there's several different models of participation here. A lot of schools we work with here in the Central Ohio area do this as a class assignment. Some work interdisciplinary. So a few of our schools, I know that the language arts teachers work with the history teachers, and they do it as kind of a combined class project. Again, some of those schools then hold a school contest and then send people to the regional contest. Even if they want to send everyone from their class to the regional contest, the school contest is a really good opportunity for students to get practice in especially the interview section and kind of see how they're going to be judged and what improvements they can make to their projects. Another fairly common thing we see here at Region 6 is the extracurricular situation. So there are a couple schools that do this as a club. So an after-school club that'll happen. They meet maybe once a week, but it's pretty student-driven. The most student-driven is those students who participate independently, and we definitely see a few of those as well. So the thing to remember with the students who are doing this as an independent assignment is that they just need an advisor. So they need someone who is able to help them out with things, get them registered, can check over their work. We all make mistakes, right? So an advisor is a really important thing to have. Now, this can be a teacher, it could be a librarian, it could be even a parent. So just kind of depends on the situation there. So what's the big idea? The fun thing about History Day is that every year students choose their topic that fits within a theme. So past themes you can see on this slide, we have a bunch of different ones. I'll point out conflict and compromise, breaking barriers, communication and history. They're pretty broad, right? So students can kind of fit topics they're interested in into a lot of these different categories, which is great because it's important to remember that while students might be interested in local things, and we certainly hope they are, they're able to do whatever the heck they want. So whatever's interesting to them, they can find something that'll fit within the theme. So basically, the parameter, at least 20 years in the past to make it historical, to help them start to see some of the long-term impacts of this historic event that they're talking about. But, they can choose something as local as Prohibition in Westerville, right? Or as international as the space station. So it can be whatever is interesting to them at the time. Now, the fun thing too is that students can pick a category to present their findings in. So these are the 5 different categories. We have documentaries, websites, exhibits, papers, and performances. And now here's my trick where I'm going to do my best and try to get over to the website here. So if you go to the National History Day website, this is the page you'll land on. It has so much information. So there's a For Teachers tab, For Students tab. Under the For Students tab, there is this categories section. So what's great is that you can just look at all of the different categories. They always give you a little video. They give you a little booklet. You do have to pay for that, but there are plenty of free resources on this website as well, including a way to see different examples. So I'm not going to play any of the documentaries for you here today, but note that there's a couple junior group ones, a couple senior group ones, a couple senior individual ones. If you're interested in exhibits, we also have exhibits. So you can look at a junior individual exhibit, see what this thing looks like. They are often trifold boards. There are all kinds of size requirements that you can find in the rule book, but it's a good example of someone who really had a good time with their exhibit, and it's effective, right? They wanted to communicate something visually, and they certainly did. So again, this is a really great resource, this whole website for you as you are working your way through History Day. We also have the rule book. So the rule book is on that History Day website as well. You can find it in a few different places. There's a for teachers section with annual themes again. So if you are looking for the rule book, you'll find it on this website. You'll also find the evaluation forms. So each category has slightly different criteria, right? Because a documentary is going to be pretty different than a paper. So each one of those categories, you can find these different evaluation sheets. And I encourage you to take a look at them because there's a lot of different things that students are being evaluated on. And you can see the different columns here: exemplary, proficient, developing, novice. The really interesting aspect of History Day is that in between each competition cycle, so in between school, regional, state, national, students have a chance to revise and refine their projects. So if their project is moving on, they will still get all of this feedback from the judges who are looking at their projects on the History Day event day. And they'll have all of this information. They'll be able to see what needs to be strengthened. They'll see what they're doing really well. So it's a really good opportunity for students to kind of get a handle on all of that. The rule book also has, it has all of the information you need on what citations are to be used, what materials are allowed, all of that good stuff. So it's a really important resource. Now, this year's theme is Frontiers in History, People, Places, Ideas. So like most of the themes from years past, it is pretty broad, right? We have a lot of different things when we're considering frontiers, but just to give you an idea, that is what our theme is. I'm not going to go over all of these pitfalls and suggestions because Kristen's going to cover a lot of this in a very practical manner that's, I think, pretty helpful. But something to remember is that the project should be, like, there should be a thesis, and Kristen will talk about that. But something people often fall into is that it's really easy to find some historic figure that you're really interested in and write a biography about them. And while that's interesting and exciting for the students to learn about someone, that's not really making a historical argument. So it's important to be able to make that argument. Something that I think is going to come up quite often in our frontiers category or theme this year is that we need to make sure we're exploring multiple viewpoints. That's going to probably come up. There's a lot of different ways that frontiers can be interpreted, and one of them is probably going to be Manifest Destiny, exploring the American West. So that's going to be something to keep in mind. Some suggestions: make sure your students are looking at questions, just asking research questions, trying to guide their research in different directions. It's important they do all of that before they, develop a thesis, because how can they have their argument if they don't really know what they're arguing yet? So finding primary and secondary sources, super important here. Focusing on the theme. Sometimes teachers will have their students literally write the words from the theme into their thesis. That's certainly effective. They don't have to do that, but just make sure that theme is represented throughout the whole project. So some important dates for us. Our registration deadline for the Region 6 contest is February 21st, 2023. So there's different timelines that happen here. A lot of teachers will maybe introduce History Day around this time every year, and then have their students start doing initial research for topics and all of that, maybe November through January. Then they'll start developing their thesis, finding all their sources, hopefully, and then developing their thesis. By February 21st, it's important to note that not everyone needs to have their project done. They just need to be registered by that time. Right now, I have our materials being due as of March 1st. Now, this is something that I'm not quite sure what's happening. We've had to be super flexible in the past few years because of COVID. The picture to the right here is from 2020. We actually, this was in February. We got our contest in right under the wire here. And it's the only time it's been done in person here at the State House since we took over. So the past few years, we've done everything online, which meant that we had to collect everyone's information online, all of their projects, all of their materials. So not quite sure what that's going to look like this year. I think we're going to do some of that, but it will be an in-person contest, so we're pretty excited about that. The contest itself will take place March 11th, 2023. And what that looks like is you're looking at the exhibit hall here in this picture. So students with all of their different categories will have somewhere to be judged by a group of adults who sign up and help us out, go through the judge training, and then use that evaluation sheet I showed you earlier when they're looking at these projects. So there will be judges for each category, for each division. They're going to be going down the line, and they also have an opportunity to talk to the students, which is pretty fun. So they'll be able to sit in a room or stand by their exhibit boards, whatever it may be. And as they're experiencing the project, they'll be able to ask students, why did you make this decision? What got you interested in the topic? And it's a good way for students, I think, to get a little bit of experience talking about their research, presenting their findings. So that's kind of the day of the contest. The students present their work. Judges will make all of their deliberations, and then at the end of the day, we have an award ceremony and announce the state qualifiers. So those state qualifiers then will go on to the state contest, which again is run by Ohio History Connection and takes place at Ohio Wesleyan University. Then the national contest, again, June 12th through 16th in College Park, Maryland. So again, in between these times, you'll see that there's, a little over a month between the regional contest and the state contest. Within that time, students can revise their work. They can strengthen what they've done, which is a good opportunity for them. It's a learning opportunity, but it's also a way to try to make their project better, and maybe they'll do super well in the national contest. It's a fun way to progress the contest. So a couple of quick resources here. That is my email address. If you have any questions about History Day or about the State House in general, feel free to shoot me an email. Ohio History Day also has its own website and a ton of great resources on there as well. So ohiohistory.org/education/ohio-history-day / but definitely, if you just Google, Ohio History Day, it comes up too. And then I spent some time on nhd.org. I spend a lot of time on nhd.org. There's a theme video. So if you are interested in learning more about the theme and how students can incorporate that, there's a 20-minute long video to watch there. They have information on annotated bibliographies, which students will have to write for this. So they're asked to separate their primary sources and their secondary sources and talk about them. They also write a process paper. You might have noticed those are also available to see in the categories tab for the NHD website. So a lot of good stuff there. If you are unsure about this whole History Day thing, which is fair because I think it's kind of difficult to explain until you've seen it, you could serve as a judge for the Region 6 contest or for the state contest. We're always looking for people who are interested in history or education to help look at these projects. So what that requires of you is that before the day of, so before March 11th, you'll have a little probably online training video to watch. You'll learn all about judging. And then the day of, again, you'll meet with these students, you'll evaluate these projects and try to rank them. It's really, really difficult sometimes to do that because students create really fascinating projects throughout all categories. But those who excel will move on to the next level, and the judges are, crucial in helping that process along. So I'm going to leave us with this quote from Deanna Mcdaniel. She is a librarian at Genoa Middle School and has been doing this for a long time. I reached out to her and asked if she had anything to pass on to other educators, and here is what she said. Why do History Day? Because you deserve it, and so do your students. History Day is absolutely the best form of project-based learning I have done, either as a librarian or a teacher. Every year, there's a new theme. This year's theme is a particularly great one: Frontiers in History, People, Places, Ideas. Students choose a historical topic that relates to the theme and research it using primary and secondary sources. They learn how to write a thesis statement, create an annotated bibliography, and do original research. Then they get to choose what kind of project: performance, paper, website, documentary, or exhibit. Whether they are artists, performers, techno-geeks, or writers, there's something here for them. Discover a frontier this year on something you feel strongly about and join National History Day. She summed up the entire presentation very well and very succinctly. But I think that is all I have. So I'm going to turn it over then to Kristen, who's going to help us dive more into primary sources, see what's going on there.
Oh, I'm muted. Now who's not good at Zoom? Thanks, Emily. That was lots of great information. I'm going to share my screen too. All right. So hi, everyone. Like Emily said, my name is Kristen. I'm a special collections supervisor in the Local History and Genealogy Division at Columbus Metropolitan Library. And here are the things generally I'm going to talk about. I'm going to kind of introduce the Local History and Genealogy Division and talk a little bit about what we do. I'm going to go over the research process. I've judged a History Day at the regional and state competition many times, and choosing a topic, developing a good thesis, and kind of distinguishing between primary and secondary sources are three things that students consistently struggle with every year. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just, it's obvious to the judges what students kind of quote unquote get it and which students don't. Generally, historical thinking skills are not necessarily things that are programmed into us. So it's not, it's kind of a skill that really needs to be developed. And as, their teacher or librarian or parent, it's great to have you kind of guide them through that process. So a lot of these things might seem basic, but kind of understanding these basic key concepts will take their History Day project from being good to being great. I'll also talk about some of the resources we have at CML, and these will be things that you can access digitally at home or come into the library. And I'll also share some really great resources that do not belong to the library, but they're great tools for your students to use too. So what do we do here in Local History and Genealogy? So we are located on the third floor of Main Library downtown, between Oak and Town Streets by Grant Hospital. Main Library is the only CML branch that has a Local History and Genealogy division. But even though our hub is here at Main Library, we really do serve and support all of the branches in the Columbus Metropolitan Library system. So a lot of our digital resources that are subscription-based that require a library card, you can access at your local branch. You don't have to come downtown. But up here in Local History and Genealogy, in terms of our physical collection, we are a reference collection for local history and genealogy research. And reference means that we are not circulating, so you can't check out things. Our local history materials primarily focus on Columbus and Central Ohio, but also cover state, national, and global history topics where Columbus or Ohio played an important role, which surprisingly is a lot of things. And as Emily mentioned, students are free to choose a topic connected to any topic, any time period or geographic location in history, not just a state or local history topic. Um, so if you're kind of thinking to yourself, well, how relevant are the resources in LHG to my students' topics? We're definitely not a one-stop shop for their research, but there's certainly something here for everyone. And one great thing about LHG is that we're part of a really large library system with all the typical resources a library offers its customers. But we're a lot more than just books. We have our archives. We'll talk a little bit about that later. And we also have bound volumes of the Columbus Dispatch from 1871 to the early 2000s. And that's also available online too. And we'll talk about that later as well. So let's kind of get into the research process for a good Ohio History Day topic. So choosing a topic is really important. You want to encourage your students to choose a good topic that's realistic and challenging, which kind of finding that balance can be difficult, but it's really important for the success of their project. The most important thing is to strike a balance between choosing a topic that's too broad or too specific. You really want something right in the middle. When students choose a topic that is too broad, it's easy for them to be overwhelmed by the expansiveness of the topic and how all-encompassing it is. And even the most well-researched topics that kind of fit into that broad category are complex and multifaceted. And so if the topic is too broad, they'll be overwhelmed by the number of resources that they have available to consult. And it can just be really overwhelming, and they usually miss the important core pieces of the story. On the other hand, you also want to try to dissuade your students from choosing a topic that is way too specific, because they will probably have trouble finding enough primary source material to do really good history research. So before they choose a topic, they should probably narrow it down to a handful of things that are interesting to them, because the more interesting it is, the more passionate they're going to be about it, and really, kind of put the hearts into their projects. So you want them to do some basic research on the topic before they start, so that they kind of have a general big picture overview of that topic and the things that are going on in that time period and place, and then can choose kind of a more centralized topic to center their thesis and research around. You also want to make sure that they choose a project that has lots of primary sources available. Lots of times students will choose a really interesting topic, but if they don't have the primary resources to consult, then they've kind of cornered themselves, because they only have secondary sources to fall back on. So they're not really doing original research. So one example would be, so we usually have lots of kind of civil rights era topics, and this theme, frontiers in history, those kind of topics fit into the theme. They'd be good candidates. But something like a general civil rights movement topic is going to be too broad. But if they pick something specific, like the Brown versus Board of Education case, then that kind of gives them a more manageable topic to hone in on with a very specific set of primary resources, while also giving them the opportunity to better understand, at a national level, what was happening during that time period in our history. Now let's talk a little bit about crafting a thesis. So again, we want our students to choose a topic that is interesting to them, but also relates to the theme. And like Emily mentioned, the theme is really broad, so you can fit lots of really cool things into the theme. So as long as they have kind of a thing that they're interested in, try to guide them, in that realm to find something that fits into the theme. And they can be really creative about how it fits into the theme too. It doesn't have to be a really obvious topic. And again, encourage them to conduct that preliminary research so they have a basic understanding of the subject and kind of the historical contributing factors that set the stage for that moment in time to fit in the theme. And you want their thesis statement to take an obvious stance on how that person or place or idea or thing that happened was significant, or how it wasn't. It could also fit into the theme and that like there was an opportunity, but for these reasons it didn't happen. And students can get really creative with their thesis statements. Really, what you want to tell them is that you don't have to worry about your thesis statement being right or wrong necessarily, because historians aren't presenting facts, they're interpreting the past. So there is a level of interpretation that goes into all history research. But as long as you have the primary sources to back up to serve as your supporting evidence and kind of prove your argument, then it's a good project. Your thesis might not be a popular opinion necessarily, but if you have that primary source material to back up your thesis statement, then it's a solid thesis statement. The types of documents that you want to encourage them to consult is a good balance between primary and secondary. And the difference between primary and secondary sources is something that is difficult for students to wrap their heads around, and adults too. There's lots of gray area in between primary and secondary. It's not a black and white determination. So I kind of just wanted to take some time to go over these things with you. So a primary source is a document that was created or recorded at the time that the event took place by someone who experienced the event firsthand. So the kinds of things in the primary source category are things like photographs, letters, postcards, other types of correspondence, kind of more personal items like diaries and scrapbooks, court records, maps, oral histories, speeches, original artworks, things like posters or pamphlets that were created for distribution, and newspapers. Secondary sources are things that were recorded after the event took place or by someone who did not live through that experience themselves. So largely books, and including biographies. So an autobiography would be a primary source, but biographies are secondary because they were not written by the person that they're about. Encyclopedias, websites, documentaries, any transcriptions or translations of handwritten documents. And you'll notice that newspapers are in the secondary source category too. So newspapers are an example of kind of that gray area between primary and secondary. And one habit I just want to mention, a good habit to get your students kind of doing consistently, is when they do consult secondary sources, especially books, encyclopedias, and websites, to have them go to the index or to the works cited page and look at what primary sources the author used to come up with their facts, because those primary sources might be ones that they need to seek out for their research. Just because something was researched by someone who's a professional historian or an academic does not mean that there are no mistakes. It is not written in stone. They should still fact check and kind of go that extra mile to see how the research was done. So here are a couple examples of that gray area and how a newspaper and some other things can be both a primary and secondary resource for different reasons. So for example, this headline here is from the May 4th, 1980 issue of the Columbus Dispatch, and it's kind of a retrospective on the Kent State shooting. And so the person who wrote this article was not at Kent State when the shooting happened. And it takes us kind of through the steps of the events It interviews a couple students who were there, one even who was injured in the shooting, and also interviews some of the faculty there and gives you a sense of kind of what the sentiment on campus was in the 80s, what some of the struggles were for the university in terms of like enrollment after the shootings, and just kind of like public opinion about how the administration handled the whole thing. Um, and so the accounts of the actual shooting that they restate in that article would be secondary information. It's really easy for inaccuracies to slip in those kinds of narratives, especially in newspapers. But the interviews from the people who were there are primary information. And so that's kind of how a source, that's an example of how a source, especially a newspaper, can give us both primary and secondary information. So you kind of have to look at those with a critical eye to parse out, who's giving what information and what kind of expertise do they have to really offer. Another example is here on the right, we have a picture of a Civil War monument that was created in the 1880s. And it's not a photograph, it's a postcard. The postcard was drawn in 1908. So the monument itself, if we were to see it, it's kind of ornamental sculpture, the statue at the top, the inscription itself, those are all primary information for the monument. But, it was erected after the Civil War, 24 years later. And then the postcard itself being drawn 20 years after that, it gives us a snapshot of what, the condition of the monument in 1908, kind of the park it looks like it's in, what the cityscape looked like during that period. But it's not a primary source for the monument itself or why it was made and for who, if that makes sense. Now, one thing that's can help you differentiate between primary and secondary sources is that, generally speaking, primary sources or original sources are the kinds of things that you find in an archival collection, versus in a library is where you find published materials like books and newspapers. Some primary sources can be considered published materials, like pamphlets that were created by an entity or a government body and then, were meant for distribution. That distribution can be considered publication, or, propaganda posters or things that were displayed in a public setting and meant for public consumption. You could consider that a published material. Even though they're part of an archival collection, they would still be a primary source. So because LHG, the Local History and Genealogy Division, has both library and archival collections, it's kind of a unique place to go for your local history research, because we can help you find those primary sources that will help you with research for your topic. But then we also have the secondary sources here to kind of help figure out that historical narrative. And like I said before, we're by no means a one-stop shop. There are lots of great local history organizations, public and university libraries across the state that have lots of great collections and resources to fit together part of the puzzle. So you can find a piece of the puzzle to your history question or thesis here at the library. Here are some things that good historians do when they're conducting their research, and they're good habits to get your students into now. Good historians consult a variety of primary and secondary resources from a variety of perspectives. So you want your primary resources to tell both sides of the story, and sometimes there are multiple sides of the story, more than two sides of the story. And so you want all of those perspectives to be represented in your research and to consider them really when you're drafting your thesis statements. And you also want to consult a variety of formats of resources. You don't want all of your primary resources to be photographs or written by one person, Because if you think about it, different types of primary resources really give you different types of information. So if you consider a photograph versus a letter, a photograph is really cool because it gives you that snapshot, that exact moment in time you can see. And a lot of times they can evoke an emotional response, or, you can see people's faces and kind of experience what they're feeling in that moment of time. Whereas, you know, a letter or a speech or a newspaper article can be more informative, a little vague. Sometimes there's some interpretation that has to happen because it's just one part of the story. You don't have the whole correspondence in a lot of cases. So, textual versus visual information can be different. Also, like, you might have a diary and a letter written by the same person, whereas a diary is usually intended just for yourself. You don't go handing around your diary for others to read. It's just kind of meant as a private journal for you, whereas a letter, the text is catered for a specific recipient. And so there might be things in the diary or in the letter or vice versa that aren't in the other. So those are all kinds of things to consider too. You also want your students to pay attention to any of the biases that the sources might have. Um, some questions that they should ask themselves are, um, who made this? How is it meant to be consumed? Is this an informative piece? Is it meant to persuade someone or evoke an emotional response? Is the audience such that this is meant to reinforce beliefs they already have or convert them to a new way of thinking? What position of power or not does the creator have? So you also want to think about their intent. Who was this made for and what was its purpose? This also leads us into evaluating a source's credibility. How was the data collected? Why was it made and for who? Were they only providing selective information, or are they communicating the whole story? Did the creator have a stake in the success or distribution of this resource? And one other thing that's really important is to contextualize your topic. Place your event, person, or idea within its historical context. History doesn't happen in a vacuum, so to really understand your topic, it's important to know what's happening at the same time in the geographical location in question, and often beyond. What are some of the local but also long-term kind of broader effects of this person, place, or thing? Now, I just want to touch on some of the physical resources we have here in the library. So, we have books, of course, and beyond local history and genealogy, um, all of our branches can support, finding books and circulating things that students can check out and take home with them to kind of do that contextualizing, placing your history or placing your topic within its time period and place in history. So that's something that any branch library can support. These resources here are just things that we have in Mate Library. The first thing I want to talk about, something that's really cool that people love looking at when they come, are we have lots of really great maps and atlases. We have city, beyond Columbus. We have lots of Columbus maps. We have cities beyond Columbus, county, state maps, lots of plat maps. Some of our earliest ones date to the 1780s. They're really great tools for understanding how a place changes over time. And we also have lots of thematic maps that might relate to some of the topics that they might choose that fit within the theme. So some transportation maps like canals, railroads. We also have some American Indian Territory maps. Um, I think we have a couple underground railroad maps too. And so those are some great things. If they do choose a local Columbus topic, the Sanborn Maps are a really great resource. An example of one there is on the left. Those were created by the Sanborn Fire Insurance Company, and the different colors of the buildings denote the type of building material that was used to construct the building, because it helped them evaluate how much of a liability it would be to insure you if your house or your business caught on fire. We also have lots of plot maps of Columbus. You can see the one on the far left there has it's the state capitol there in the center. We also have some topographical maps, like the one that you see there on the right. If any of your students have interest in doing topics related to like environmental conservation, we do have like some watersheds, waterways, kind of those kinds of climate related maps too. Newspapers are a great underutilized topic in Ohio History Day projects, I would say, and we have lots of them. We have the Columbus Dispatch, which I'll go over how to use that tool later. But from 1871 to 2015, I think, is available online, and students can use that by going on Columbus Metropolitan Library's website, and I'll show you how to get to it shortly. And it's full text searchable. So even if they don't choose a Columbus or an Ohio topic, you know, national events are typically covered in the dispatch. And so you can get lots of great information from that. We also have lots of Black newspapers. So if anyone wants to do a local history topic on the Black population of Columbus, there's the Ohio Sentinel, the Ohio State News, the Columbus Voice, the Columbus Challenger. And we also have lots of newspapers beyond Columbus too. Um, and it's always good fun to teach kids how to use the microfilm readers, which is what you see there on the right. We also have subject files, which pretty much cover any kind of local history topic you could think of for Columbus. Inside each box, which is designated by topic, which range from Ohio businesses, Ohio women, Columbus African American history, airports, arts and artists, actors, like associations and social clubs, breweries, crime, historic landmarks, hotels, housing, the history of radio in Columbus, the public school system, anything you can imagine. Um, it's essentially articles from Columbus newspapers that have been compiled by researchers. And so it's absolutely not the only thing you should look at, but it's a great first stop on your when you're kind of first starting out to get the lay of the land, see what's out there. Generally, kind of the big things are hit on in there, so then you know where to look next for a more complete story. And the picture on the left there is just an example. We have a box on artist George Bellows, and that those are articles in one of the folders in his box, many, many more. We also have our archival collection. Our archives is in the basement of the library, but if students go to the Finding Aid collection on My History, which we'll talk about more in just a moment, which is our digital collection of primary and secondary sources about Columbus history, they can do a keyword search for our finding aids, and that way they can find archival collections that might have a connection to their topic. And being a public library, they can ask a reference staff person to go get the archival collection for them. We'll bring it up for them, set them up at a table. They can look through it themselves. I find that students really like the idea of putting their hands on the primary sources because they're actually touching and interacting and engaging with the things that were created during the thing that they're studying. And it kind of makes it more real for them. So if they have the opportunity to come down or go anywhere else to actually look through the archival materials, I really encourage them to do that. Again, some of the things that they'll find here in our archives are photographic materials, so not just photographs on paper, but we also have film negatives, glass plate negatives, slides, tintypes, daguerreotypes, all of those types of things. Letters, postcards, other types of correspondence, scrapbooks, ledgers and record books, and general ephemera. And then again there, that link at the bottom is a link to the Finding Aids collection on My History. Here are some topics that our collections do well and can support that also fit into the theme Frontiers in History. We have a really wonderful African American collection on My History. That's where you'll find digitized copies of those Black newspapers that I mentioned earlier. They're a great resource for civil rights movements here in Columbus, the history of redlining in Columbus, segregation in education here in Columbus, and there's also a bit of Underground Railroad material in there too. We also have quite a few things that might be interesting for an LGBTQ history project. We have digitized several of the major local LGBT publications here in Columbus, including the Columbus Gay and Lesbian News, Prison Magazine, Outlook Magazine. We also have lots of things about transportation history in Columbus, canals, railroads, aviation, roads, buses, um, and something that our local history and our genealogy collection can support are any topics related to immigration patterns, folks coming to America, folks coming to Ohio. And now I just want to briefly go over some of the online resources. So first I'm going to talk about My History and the Columbus Dispatch Digital, which were the two big things here at the library that your students could really use. And I just want to hit on a couple of other really good ones that are not specific to the library, but they're free, good online resources where they can find primary sources for their research. So like I said, My History is our library's digital library program where you can find primary and secondary resources related to Ohio and Columbus history. And they're not just things that belong to CML, they're things that belong to other local history organizations and libraries that don't have their own online digital library for these things. So you can access things from other places on here too. And so to get to My History, this is the Columbus Metropolitan Library landing page. Click on History and Genealogy, and then this box pops up, and then click My History. And My History operates just like any other kind of search engine. So you can isolate your search to images only or text only. So if you know you're looking for photographs, you want to check that images only box. You can also click on advanced search there to narrow your search down to specific fields and terms. This is what a search results page looks like. You'll see that you can kind of further refine your results by using some of those facets on the left side. You can narrow your search by collection. You can search by subject, which are just kind of general thematic terms. And you can also limit your search by format. If we click on a record, this is what it looks like. Students can navigate through the search results page by going on to the next record and the next by clicking the little arrows there in the upper right corner. If they find a photograph that they would like to use for their board or in their paper, the crop tool is really great. It's the button to the left of the save, and they can really get a nice high resolution JPEG from using the crop tool, and it'll be good enough quality for them to put on their exhibit board or to include on their website or in their paper or whatever. And here on this page is where they find the descriptive information about the item itself. So they might not find very much information about the historical topic in general. The information here is really describing the physical item. So this information here is describing the photograph itself. So again, it's just kind of a piece of the puzzle. And now I'll show you how to get to the digital dispatch. So we're back to the library's landing page. Instead of clicking history and genealogy, we're going to click research. And then this is what comes up, and you'll scroll to the bottom and click news, magazines, and journals. And then Columbus Dispatch Digital is the middle box there. Click access now. And then it'll have you log in with your library card and PIN number. And then you come up to the landing page for the digital dispatch. You do a search just like you can in My History. There are also ways you can narrow your search. The time period specific ones are probably the ones that we use the most. Here are all of the different hits for the keywords you searched for. You can see the little previews on the right. And then here's just an example where I've limited the search down to just the decade of the 40s. And then all of my Rickenbacker highlights are there because that's one of the words I searched for in the search bar. And if I click on one to view the full article, it doesn't just show you the article, it shows you that full page of the dispatch. And so you can use those tools in the upper right hand corner to zoom in and zoom out. You can pan around with your mouse. The little scissor tool there will allow you to crop the view down to a specific article or picture, or you could do the whole page. And then you can save that to your computer or your flash drive. And it will also generate a citation, so you don't have to worry about your student forgetting, oh, like what issue or which paper did this come from, because it'll all be included in the file name. Here are just a couple search tips, especially the dispatch can be difficult sometimes to navigate, especially if your search terms, kind of beyond your control, just happen to be words that occur often. And so there are 3 types of searches that can really be helpful to narrow things down so that you're just getting the kind of results that you're interested in. And one of those is a proximity search, and that allows you to look for 2 terms that appear within a specified distance apart in the text. So, for example, if I did the search Warren near to Harding, the near to means that it's going to bring back any search for me that has Warren within 2 words of Harding. So this search will capture any time that his name is spelled Warren Harding, or oftentimes it's also Warren G. Harding or Warren Gamaliel Harding. It'll bring all of those things back. Another thing you can try is the wildcard, where you use a special character to find records that might contain misspellings or missing letters. So, for example, if I did WOM with an asterisk N, it'll bring back both the word women and woman. And then if I did Ben with a question mark, it would bring back Ben and Benny. There's also the exact phrase search, which you simply just put quotation marks around the words or phrase that you want to bring back. So if I didn't have quotation marks, for example, here with Great War, it would bring back every instance of great and every instance of war. But I just want specifically World War I. I'm just looking for Great War. So if I put those in quotes, it's only going to bring things back that are Great War with no words in between. Here are some other resources that extend beyond the library. There's Ohio Memory, Chronicling America, Library of Congress, and the Digital Public Library of America, which is often also referred to as DPLA. So I wanted to show you the URLs here so that you have them. And then we'll go over the home pages so you know what they look like and the kinds of things you can find there. So Ohio Memory is the Ohio History Connection's digital library of primary and secondary sources about Ohio history. And similar to My History, Ohio Memory also includes items from partner organizations across Ohio, public libraries, university libraries, local history organizations, and the like. And it functions very similarly to my history. There are different ways you can browse the collections there and refine your searches. A really great resource for students. Encourage them to check this out too. Oftentimes, a lot of the things that they'll find in my history, they won't find on Ohio Memory, or they'll find in Ohio Memory, but they won't find in my history. So they really should be looking at both. Chronicling America is the Library of Congress's digital newspaper program. It includes newspapers from all 50 states from 1777 up to 1963. It's easy to search by state and even narrow your search down to city or county. So I encourage students to use the advanced search to get that more specified result set. You can also use the All Digitized Newspapers tab there at the top if you want to see which papers were being published during the time period you're interested in a specific place, especially because newspaper titles, it might be the same paper, but the title of the paper might change 3 or 4 times in the course of 10 years. So that can be really useful to make sure that you're getting the whole scope of what you're looking for. Generally, the Library of Congress's digital collection is also a great place to look. They have some nice featured content things there at the top, and then you can search within specific collections, or you can just do an overall digital collection search across their whole digital library there at the top. The Digital Public Library of America is essentially my history or Ohio memory, but for the whole country. And so libraries and other organizations contribute content that's already hosted on their own digital library to the Digital Library of America. So it's a good way to find things that relate to your topic that might belong to other organizations that you didn't think to look or you're not familiar with. And another really cool thing to check out is they have primary source sets on there, and there's a pretty good chance that they might find one on the topic they're interested in, or at least something that relates enough that it could be really useful. So encourage them to check those out too. And finally, we're here to answer any questions. We have a general email address for our division, which is just history@columbuslibrary.org. Anyone who answers that email will be happy to guide you or a student to the resource that would be most helpful. We also offer one-on-one appointments with a librarian. You can do those either here at the library in person or virtually over Zoom for kind of more one-on-one individualized help. And if you call the general number there, if you want to talk to us on the phone, we talk to people on the phone all the time. Just ask to be connected to the local history and genealogy division, and we're always here to help. So I hope that was helpful for everybody.
The last thing I wanted to mention is that we would also like to have like a student research day at the main library downtown. So I think we were looking at the last weekend in January. We'll get that firmed up. So be on the lookout for, an actual date and time for that. But just so that students can come down and have a physical research day, we will be there. So, there will be dedicated people to help them with that microfilm reader. And I think it's really helpful to see what the library has physically there in person, because you guys certainly have so many good resources that we hope students take advantage of.
Yeah, we hope so too. Come on down to the library.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And again, if you have any questions about History Day or the library, reach out to us. We would love to help you.
Yeah, thank you.